he often did not use those parables so the crowd would better understand what he meant, but so hearing they would not understand and seeing they would not perceive. Due to the what? Why did he do that? Due to the dullness of their hearts and their inability to hear. Matthew 13, 13 and 14. We know that the parable of the rich man and Lazarus was a parable because Jesus was speaking to the tax gatherers. Now we're in Luke 15, 1 and 16, 1 and 14. He was speaking to the tax gatherers, to the sinners, it says, to the Pharisees, the scribes, and yes, to the disciples. Mark said he was explaining everything to his own disciples in Mark 4:34. So they were able to understand that, I guess, more of the details than we can. Because he was there with them and they could ask questions and such as that. Even the disciples didn't understand what the parables meant part of the time, and Jesus had to explain to them. In this parable, Jesus seems to be speaking specifically, if you look at Luke 16, 14, specifically to the Pharisees. That was a crowd, so you don't expect, you expect it to be a parable, okay? I say all that so that we could expect it. That's what we should expect to see. Okay. We'll get into our introduction just a little bit. Let me get out of it so you can see just a little bit better. All I have to do is click myself out like that. The story of the rich man and Lazarus appears in the context and proximity of other parables, and it's located near the end of a long line of parables in Luke 15, 16. Okay. The parable of the lost sheep, Luke 15, the parable of the lost coin, the parable of the lost son. Nobody argues that those are parables. The parable of the unjust steward, and the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. But everybody wants to say, oh, it's not a parable. It was something that really happened. Now, let's be careful. It's interesting to note that only a few weeks later that Jesus would indeed, and I think I'm right on this, would indeed resurrect a man named Lazarus. Isn't that something? Here he talks about Lazarus, and in a couple of weeks, he's going to resurrect a man named Lazarus. Jesus sent the Pharisees a sign raising Lazarus from the dead, yet the Jewish leaders continued to be stubborn and hard-hearted and still would not believe. And you can see that in John 12, 10 and 11. Okay? I hope that helped. Jesus did not preface this story with such words as the kingdom of heaven is like. Some scholars believe this story is not fiction or even a parable. So what would it be? Some people believe it was just Jesus. It was a story, it is said, that was prevalent in those days, and Jesus was just throwing it out there without any meaning at all. I don't understand that, but that's what they believe. But an actual event, some people believe, as is spoken as if it actually happened. Some people actually believe that. The events of the context should lead us to believe this to be a parable, but even if true, there are lessons to be learned. Let's don't dismiss it because it's a parable, in other words. Let's get right into it, if you will, and understand it a little more perfectly, okay? All right, let's see. See if this meeting is recorded. Okay. Let me get this out of over here. Got it. I've got one over on this side to show me, well, you can't see which way I'm pointing, can you? Yeah, now I've got one over on this side to where I can see what you're seeing, because I always wonder, because looking at this, I can't tell what you're seeing. Okay, so now the next point I want to make, let me get out of this too so you can see it. Does this parable offer heralds of the hopes of heaven and the horrors of hell? This rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16, 19 through 31. I guess we all have been where the preacher was just preaching away and talking about how wonderful it was in heaven where the poor man was, and how terrible it was in hell where the rich man was, and all of that about their soul and all of that stuff. Is that really what was going on here? What actually happened? Some believe very strongly now, maybe you do, I don't know, but some people believe that Abraham's bosom doesn't really mean his belly, I guess, but it means heaven. Now, why would we think that? Some people believe that hell is a place right now of torment. Some people believe that this parable talks about what happens when we die. And some people believe that Lazarus went to heaven, the rich man went to a burning, torturing hell. And in this story, many people believe that there is communication that's held between heaven and hell. Can you imagine people in heaven looking down on people in hell and seeing them torment and being happy? I can't imagine that. And some people believe that Abraham was alive and communicated with the rich man. The common perception of this parable is that the rich man was an evil man who died. His soul went to a burning, tormenting hell. Lazarus was a poor beggar who was eat up with some dread disease. So he had to be a good man. And Lazarus died, and his soul was carried by angels to heaven, where he was so happy and blessed. Now, well, let's go just a little bit further. It's further believed and taught that the rich man, after suffering some of the torments of hell, the agonies, he said, saw how much better off Lazarus was and requested of Abraham, for why he would have request of Abraham, that he would send Lazarus to cool his tongue with, if but a drop of water, to give him some release from the agony of the flames he was suffering in hell. He also asked Abraham to send Lazarus to warn his 5 brothers of just how bad this place of torment was. Well, let's move on just a little further. And further believed and taught that in his reasoning with Abraham, the rich man pleaded, if you go to them from the dead, they will surely listen to you and be spared from this place of torment. You see what they was asking? Abraham, I know you're dead, but if you go to them, my 5 brothers, and they'll listen to you because you're coming to them from the dead. And Abraham warned him of the great, so many people believe that there's a great gulf fixed between heaven and hell, that it was not possible for there to be travel between the 2 places. In other words, you can't just go one to one and go to the other.
Hey, Dennis.
Hey.
There are those who think that then at that time the hell had 2 compartments. One was the paradise side and one was the fire and brimstone side.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, that's, that's the way you don't talk.
I don't believe that, though.
Well, now, wait a minute. I just wondering where it says that in this parable. Don't say anything about it.
Well, that's what I've been looking for that too, by the way.
Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Okay. This is it, isn't it? This is, and you see signs on the highway and in the, where they have their signs in the church, they have their little messages. You see the signs that say, are you going to heaven? Are you going to hell? That sort of thing. Was this parable meant to be a true to life example so we can know what it will be like following death? I think there are a few things, however, that are not considered in this interpretation of the parable. You think about it, and then we're going to open for some conversation. You be thinking about some questions or conversation you might like to interject, okay? Some things that are not considered in these understandings that we've just got through looking at. One thing, if you read the parable, what does it say? Lazarus died and was carried by angels to Abraham's bosom. Now, if I know where Abraham's bosom is? It's in the cave of Magpela. And it's dust. That's all there is left of it. And if he was alive, why did he have to be carried by angels anywhere? Okay. It only says that Lazarus was sick and poor. It doesn't say he was a good man, does it? It says that the rich man died. And what happened to him? Did he go to hell? Well, a burning hell? No, that's not what it says. It says that the rich man died and was buried. The rich man, notice in the parable, the rich man had eyes and he had a tongue. Nothing is said about a soul or spirit in this. You won't find the word soul or spirit anywhere in this parable. But when people sometimes preach about it, it's always about their soul and their spirit. The word heaven is not used in the parable. The word that Jesus used in conjunction with the final place of punishment for the ungodly was not Hades. That's the grave, or it was Hades. It was not Gehenna. It was not Gehenna. Gehenna was the word Jesus used in this parable. And I may have that wrong on I may have it backwards on your outline sheet. Just change it when you get it. Abraham, another thing people don't notice was that Abraham was the rich man's father. In some way of looking at it, we'll have to kind of study that and think about that just a little bit, and see what we can. Any questions or comments so far? I've just rattled on here now for a while, but these are some things that I thought might be prerequisite to what we'd be talking about. Any comments at all so far?
I think that there is a key to this, and you may get to it, but I don't want to get ahead of you or nothing like that. But there is a key to this parable, and whenever you think it be appropriate, I'll tell you what I think the key in the key verses to opening this parable is. But I'll wait.
Okay. Okay, that's good. We'll get around to it. I used to carry one in my pocket. It was round and they had to it on it. It was around to it, so we'll get around to it. Don't worry about it. So let's see. There is the things that I think need to be considered, and I just got through going over. Let's see. I haven't got to it yet, have I? Still haven't got around to it. There you go. I should have had that up while I was talking about it, but I got too excited, I think. So those are the things that need to be considered, but probably are not being considered. Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll look at some, get back to the parable itself. You can see there's the rich man, and over there's the beggar full of sores and in agony and all sorts, all that sort of thing. Now, look at these observations. Think about this. And this is something I've also found on this lifehopeandtruth.com. And I thought it was worth repeating. I'm going to give them credit. In John 11, they said, Jesus resurrected his friend Lazarus, the brother of Mary and Martha, not the character in the parable. Before doing so, he told his disciples, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I may wake him up, in verse 11. When the disciples were confused about what he meant, he clarified what he meant by stating that Lazarus is, as they say in the South, Lazarus is dead. So in verses 13 and 14, Jesus likened death to sleep. It's quite frequent in the Bible, actually. I don't know where we got off on this other tangent that we used. The definition for death that is common today is separation from God. I don't know how to get that, but anyhow, that's what it is. Jesus likened death to sleep, a state of unconsciousness. Jesus' words harmonize with other scriptures, like Ecclesiastes 9 and 5, the dead know not anything. So wouldn't it be contradictory, men, for Jesus to teach that the rich man and the beggar Lazarus were very much awake after they died? Would that not be tremendously contradictory?
Well, sure.
Jesus made a clear statement about heaven. Nobody has ascended there, he said, John 3:13. So would it be strange and inconsistent for Jesus to say in one situation that no one has gone to heaven, and then later that Lazarus, the beggar, went to heaven? This don't make sense, does it? Jesus said in Matthew 10:28, fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Now that word hell there is the word Gehenna. That's the word Jesus used when he's talking about the future punishment of the wicked. Jesus associated this hell, Gehenna, with, listen to this, men, destruction. He is able to, what is that word right there? destroy. Destroy both soul and body. Wow. When something is destroyed, it ceases to exist. Jesus described hell as a place of complete destruction rather than a place with conscious and tormented where these individuals live. It's consistent with how other biblical writers described the fate of the wicked in Malachi 4:3 and Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death, and then Malachi, where they shall tread down the wicked, there'll be ashes under the soles of your feet. So these statements give us a clear understanding of Jesus' teaching. After dead, people don't immediately go to heaven or hell. Instead, or not Gehenna hell, let me clarify that. Instead, they await a future time when they will be resurrected from the dead in Luke 14, verse 14. And even then, the meek are going to inherit the earth. They're not going to heaven, as I understand it. Any comments on that? Because now I'm going to get to what does the parable, what does it mean? What is he talking about? And we're going, first of all, look at, is that what he's talking about? What was that, a Christmas movie they used to have? I don't think so. So that's the way I look at it. So what does the parable mean? Well, again, I'm going to refer to this from Life, Hope, and Truth. It has some good ideas here. We have to begin by looking at the context in which he gave it. Right before he told this parable, Jesus had been in conflict with the Pharisees. Luke 16:14-15. The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, also heard all these things, and they derided him. And he said to them, you are those who justify yourselves before men. God knows your heart. What is highly esteemed among men is an abomination in the sight of God. Jesus was dealing with people who were fixated on the accumulation of wealth. Sound like Americans to me. And who hypocritically put on a false front of being righteous before people. However, and internally, their hearts were unrighteous. Simply put, these people pretended to be righteous, but in reality were full of greed and lack of concern for others. Their righteousness was just a show. Jesus used the parable of Lazarus and the rich man to warn of the pitfalls and dangers of living a life driven by greed and lack of love for others. The context of the parable is not about death or about even what happens after death. The context was the danger or greed and hypocrisy. The two main characters in the parable, the rich man who lived a posh life and ate well every day, and a poor man named Lazarus who was covered with sores and it seemed was unable to work to feed himself. Instead of helping Lazarus, the rich man cold-heartedly ignored his suffering. When we view this parable, men, through the context of Scripture, we understand that it's not meant to be taken as a literal record of a real future conversation that will take place. It's a fictional story told to make a point. The point is simple but profound. Live righteously now. Don't put it off because you may just run out of time. I think that's pretty good. Anybody concur with that, or would you like to look at it just a little deeper?
No, that makes perfect sense to me.
Does it? Okay, it does, doesn't it? I mean, there's a lot of good there. So let's. Anybody else? What sticks out with you, to you? Let me, if I may, stretch your mind just a little bit. Okay. What else could that parable mean? Could the rich man represent the nation of Israel, you think? Look in Exodus 25 or 28, 1 through 5. Listen to this, men. Talking about the clothing of the priest. They shall make holy garments for Aaron, your brother, and his sons, that he may minister as priests to me. They shall take the gold and the blue and the purple and the scarlet material and the fine linen. Could the rich man represent the nation of Israel? Think about that. Could Lazarus represent the Gentiles? Lazarus, the word, means without help. Therefore, remember that formerly, I'm reading from Ephesians 2:11 through 12. Remember that formerly, Paul said to the Ephesians, you, the Gentiles in the flesh, who were called uncircumcision by the so-called circumcision, there's Israel and the Gentile, which is performed in the flesh by human hands. Remember that you were at that time separate from Christ, the promise of Christ, excluded from the commonwealth of Israel, strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. If that isn't without hope, I don't know what it could be. Without help and without hope. Okay, now, could Lazarus' death represent being buried with Christ by baptism into his death? Romans 6:4. Therefore, we have been buried with him through baptism into death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life. Just for your thinking, okay. Could Abraham's bosom represent the promises near and dear to Abraham? Galatians 3:29, if you belong to Christ, you're Abraham's descendants, heirs according to that same promise. Okay, that would be my take on that. You know, at least it gives something other than just a little point at the end of it. You know, some of Jesus, take the parable of the sower. Okay, was there just a little blurb at the end? Is that all that we were to be thinking about? The reapers, he said, were the angels. It gives a litany of different things that these things in the parable meant. So it's quite possible that there's a little more to it than just a little point at the end. Okay? Just something to think about. Not to get too excited about, but something to think about. All right, let's go to the next one. What else could the parable mean? Could the rich man's death and burial be Israel's burial among the nations? Listen to Deuteronomy, Moses in Deuteronomy 4:25-27. He said to Israel, when you become the father of children and children's children and have remained, and you got grandkids and you've been here a long time in the land, and you begin to act corruptly, make an idol in the form of anything, do that which is evil in the sight of the Lord your God, so as to provoke him to anger, God says, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that you will surely perish quickly from the land where you are going over the Jordan to possess it. You'll not live long on it, but will be utterly destroyed. The Lord will scatter you among the people, among the nations, and you will be left few in number among the nations where the Lord drives you. Now, let me ask you, men, has that happened to Israel?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. Let me get out of here so you can see all of this. Okay, what about this next one? Could the flames that, this is good, man, look. Could the flames the rich man was suffering represent the flames of persecution? Yeah. Listen to Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 64-66. See, Moses is getting down to where he knows he's going to die pretty soon. And so he's given some final instruction to the people of Israel. He said, listen what he says, Deuteronomy 28, 64-66. Moreover, the Lord will scatter you among all people from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth. And there you shall serve other gods, wood and stone, which your fathers have not known. Among those nations you shall find no rest, and there will be no resting place for the sole of your foot. You can find anti-Semitic people everywhere. Isn't that amazing? But listen, there's more. But there the Lord will give you a trembling heart, failing eyes, and despair of soul. So your life will hang in doubt before you, and you will be in dread night and day, and you shall have no assurance of your life. Now let's get into this other part. Let's go back to chapter 28, verse 21-22. Let's talk a little bit about these flames of suffering that the rich man was enduring. The Lord will make the pestilence cling to you until he has consumed you from the land where you are entering to possess. The Lord will smite you with consumption and with fever and with inflammation and with fiery heat and with the sword and with blight and with mildew, and they will pursue you until you perish. Why couldn't I hope you can at least see the possibility. The rich man had a right to call Abraham father. Look in John 8:39. Do you not suppose that you can say to yourself, to John the Baptist, we have Abraham for our father? For I say to you that from these stones, God is able to raise up children to Abraham. And then to Jesus, that was Matthew 3:9, and John 8:39, they answered and said to him, unto Jesus, Abraham is our father. So am I off base by saying that the rich man was Israel, the nation of Israel? I think it's a possibility. What about the Great Gulf? Could it not be the new covenant ratified by the blood of Christ but rejected by the nation of Israel? I think it could be. Listen to how Paul said to the Ephesians again in 2:14, 15, and 16. For he himself is our peace, that's Jesus, who made both groups into one, Jew and Gentile, broke down the barrier of the dividing wall. Sounds like a gulf, a dividing wall, doesn't it? By abolishing in his flesh the enmity, which is the law of commandments contained in ordinances, so that in himself he might make the two into one new man, thus establishing peace, and might reconcile them both in one body to God through the cross, by it having put to death the enmity. So that's my take on those parts. Now, in the last, let's look at the last here. What else could the parable mean? Okay. Who has Moses? You know, he said they have Moses and the prophets. Who has Moses and the prophets? The nation of Israel. Who are Israelites? Paul said in Romans 9:4-5. To whom belongs the adoption as sons and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the law and the temple service and the promises? Whose are the fathers? So when he said they have Moses and the prophets, you see the 5 sons, he's talking about the 5 sons that the rich man wanted him to go send to them so that they could, be warned about what to expect. Okay. Who was it that didn't believe when Jesus was resurrected from the dead? Matthew 28:11-14. Now, while they were on their way, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priest all that had happened. And when they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers and said, you are to say his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. Notice, men, the chief priest were people that said they should do this. And if this should come to the governor's ears, we'll win him over and keep you out of trouble. Who was it that didn't believe when Jesus was resurrected from? They'll believe if someone is resurrected from the dead. Remember, in verse 31, if they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be persuaded, even if someone rises from the dead. In conclusion, with that, Jesus was that prophet that Moses warned the nation of Israel about in Deuteronomy 18. I'll raise up a prophet from among your countrymen. Literally, now look at this. I'll raise up a prophet from among your countrymen. The little note there says brothers. I've got 5 brothers. I will raise up a prophet from among your brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth. Peter said, every soul that does not hear that prophet will be utterly destroyed from among the people. Just possibilities. I'm not saying that's the way it should be, but it's kind of remarkable to me how it works out and how it works. Encourage you to read and compare. And like I said, I hope to have this ready as soon as I can. I've got an appointment tomorrow that I'm going to have taken. It's going to be an all-day thing, and it'll be Tuesday before I can get back to this and get it all cleaned up, and so I can send it to you. And hopefully, man, I can get it right this time. I'm trying my best, but I'm not doing such a good job. But hopefully, you can see. Any other comments or questions or anything?
I think the key to this whole thing is in the 16th through the 18th verses of the 16th chapter, and there you have the separation from the law into grace in that fashion, I think.
Okay, so the law and the prophets prophesied till John. And after that, the kingdom kingdom of heaven, Matthew says, and the others say kingdom of God, which is the same thing, is being has been happening, has been emphasized. So that's what they did. Yeah, that's a good analogy. That works with me, Wade.